grandson pushed me off a cliff to claim my business. When the papers were signed, I walked in alive. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that day it's also easier to spill. My name is Harold Mitchell, and at 63, I built something most men only dream of. Mitchell Real Estate Empire, 47 properties across 3 states, worth north of $200 million. Not bad for a kid who started with a rusty toolbox and a dream in 1982. Every brick laid, every contract signed, every sleepless night, it all led to this moment, standing on Eagle's Peak with my grandson Danny, watching the sun paint the valley below in shades of gold. Beautiful view, isn't it? I said, adjusting my hiking boots on the rocky ledge. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and promise. This was supposed to be our bonding trip, grandfather and grandson, away from the suffocating boardrooms and endless phone calls that had consumed my life. Danny stood beside me, his 25-year-old frame lean and restless. He'd grown up in mansions while I'd grown up in trailer parks. Designer clothes instead of hand-me-downs. Private schools instead of public struggles. Everything I'd worked for was meant to give him opportunities one never had, but somewhere along the way, I'd created a monster I didn't recognize. Yeah, Grandpa. Really beautiful, he replied, but his voice carried an edge I'd been noticing more lately. His eyes weren't on the valley, they were studying me, calculating something I couldn't quite grasp. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months. The way he'd hover around my office during board meetings, asking pointed questions about succession plans. How he'd grown frustrated when I refused to hand over control of the company. The heated argument we'd had just last week when I told him he needed to prove himself, start from the bottom like I did. You don't understand, Grandpa, he'd shouted then. Times are different now. I shouldn't have to wait decades to claim what's already mine. But standing there on that cliff, breathing the mountain air, I thought maybe this trip would help us reconnect. Maybe the grandson I'd bounced on my knee, the boy who used to help me inspect construction sites wearing a tiny hard hat, was still somewhere inside this bitter young man. You know, Danny, I said, stepping closer to the edge to get a better view. When I was your age, I thought success meant having all the answers. But the older I get, the more I realize it's about asking the right questions. He moved behind me, and I heard his footsteps on the gravel. What kind of questions? Like whether the people you trust actually deserve that trust. I turned to face him, and that's when I saw it, something cold and final in his eyes that made my blood freeze. Danny, what's wrong? You look. I'm sorry, Grandpa. The words came out flat, emotionless, just before his hands slammed into my chest with shocking force. Time seemed to slow as I stumbled backward, my arms windmilling desperately for balance. The ledge crumbled under my feet, and suddenly I was falling, the world spinning in a nauseating carousel of sky, rock, and regret. The betrayal hit harder than the rocks would. As I plummeted through the air, 40 feet down toward the jagged outcropping below, my mind couldn't process what had just happened. This was Danny, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, who'd cried in my arms when his parents divorced, who'd called me his hero at his high school graduation. I crashed through a cluster of pine branches that slowed my fall just enough to save my life, though I wouldn't know that for several agonizing minutes. My body slammed into a narrow ledge 15 feet from the bottom, the impact driving the air from my lungs and sending lightning bolts of pain through every nerve. Above me, I could hear Danny's voice calling down, though the words seemed to come from another world. Grandpa! Oh God, Grandpa! Can you hear me? The performance was Oscar-worthy. He waited exactly 30 seconds, long enough for anyone listening to believe he was devastated, before I heard his footsteps retreating. No rope. No rescue attempt. No calling for help. Just the sound of my own blood slowly dripping onto the stone below. As consciousness faded in and out like a broken radio signal, fragments of understanding began to piece themselves together in my shattered mind. This wasn't a moment of rage or temporary insanity. This was planned. Calculated. Danny had researched this trail, chosen this specific spot, and orchestrated this entire bonding trip as my execution. The irony wasn't lost on me, even through the haze of pain. The empire I'd built to secure my family's future had become the very reason my own grandson wanted me dead. Every dollar I'd earned, every property I'd acquired, every success I'd achieved, it had all led to this moment of ultimate betrayal. But Danny had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the stubborn streak that had carried me from poverty to prosperity. The same determination that had driven me to work 18-hour days, to take risks when others wouldn't, to build something from nothing, that fire still burned, even as my body lay broken on the mountainside. I was Harold Mitchell, and I hadn't survived 6 decades of life's hardest punches just to die at the hands of my own blood. As the darkness closed in around me, one thought pulsed through my mind with crystal clarity. If Danny wanted my empire so badly, he was going to have to work a lot harder to claim it. The last thing I remember before unconsciousness took hold was the sound of a car engine starting in the distance. Danny driving away, probably already rehearsing his story about the terrible accident that claimed his beloved grandfather's life. He had no idea that this was just the beginning. Pain was my alarm clock. When consciousness crept back like unwelcome sunlight through broken blinds, every breath felt like swallowing glass. My left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and something warm and sticky had dried across my forehead. Blood. The metallic taste filled my mouth as I tried to move, sending fresh waves of agony through my ribs. How long had I been out? The sun had moved. What had been afternoon light was now the deep orange of early evening. Danny would be back in town by now, probably making phone calls with just the right amount of grief in his voice. "There's been a terrible accident. Grandpa fell. I couldn't reach him." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, though it came out more like a wheeze. The boy had always been a good actor. I remembered him in the 4th grade play, convincing everyone he was a tree so well that they gave him a standing ovation. Now he was performing the role of his life, the devastated grandson. The ledge I'd landed on was barely 3 feet wide, carved into the cliff face like nature's cruel joke. Below me, another 30-foot drop waited to finish what Danny had started. Above, the rock face stretched up smooth and unforgiving. I was trapped in a stone coffin, and the vultures were already circling. But I'd been counted out before. Moving felt like torture, but staying still meant dying. I forced myself to assess the damage. Definitely broken ribs, possibly a concussion, left arm useless, and something wrong with my ankle. But I was breathing, thinking, and most importantly, angry enough to keep going. The first challenge was water. My lips were cracked, and dehydration would kill me faster than my injuries. I remembered seeing a small stream about 50 yards from the base of the cliff during our hike up. If I could somehow get down there. It took me 2 hours to move 10 feet along the ledge, inch by agonizing inch. My good hand found every crack in the rock, every root strong enough to bear weight. The pain was a living thing, clawing at my consciousness, begging me to just lie still and let nature take its course. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about Danny's cold eyes. The calculation behind his "I'm sorry, Grandpa." The way he'd waited just long enough to sell his performance before walking away. Darkness fell as I reached a section where the ledge widened slightly. Here, a stubborn pine tree had somehow found purchase in the rock, its roots creating a natural ladder of sorts. My construction background served me well. I'd spent decades analyzing structural integrity, and this tree was my salvation. The descent nearly killed me 3 times. Once when my broken arm caught on a branch, sending white-hot lightning through my entire body. Once when loose rock gave way under my feet, leaving me dangling by my fingertips 30 feet above certain death. And once when exhaustion made me black out for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When my feet finally touched solid ground, I collapsed and wept like a child. The stream was exactly where I remembered, though crawling to it took another hour. The water was ice-cold and tasted like life itself. I drank until my stomach cramped, then forced myself to assess my situation rationally. I was miles from the nearest road, injured, and presumed dead. My phone had been in my jacket pocket, now probably shattered at the bottom of the cliff. Even if I could walk, reaching help would take days I didn't have. That's when I saw the light. A flashlight beam, sweeping back and forth about a quarter-mile downstream. At first, I thought it might be a search party, but then I realized how unlikely that was. Danny wouldn't report me missing until morning, and even then, he'd claim we'd gotten separated during the hike. Help! I tried to call out, but my voice was barely a whisper. The beam was moving away. Desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. I found a rock and began hitting it against another, the sharp cracks echoing through the valley. The flashlight stopped, then began moving toward me. 20 minutes later, a man emerged from the darkness, late 50s, beard, wearing camping gear. Jesus Christ! He breathed when he saw me. What happened to you? His name was Marcus Webb, a retired park ranger who'd been camping in the area. He didn't ask too many questions when I told him I'd fallen during a solo hike, just focused on keeping me alive. His small cabin was hidden in a grove of aspens, off any official trail. You need a hospital, Marcus said as he cleaned my wounds by lamplight. No, the word came out stronger than I felt. Not yet. He studied my face in the flickering light. You running from something? Or someone? I met his eyes. Someone thinks I'm dead. And for now, I need to keep it that way. Marcus nodded slowly. He'd seen enough of life to recognize when a man had his reasons. Well then, Harold Mitchell, he said, reading my name from the ID in my wallet. I guess you'd better start healing fast. Because staying dead is a full-time job. As he prepared a makeshift splint for my arm, one thought burned through the fog of pain and exhaustion. Danny wanted my empire, and he thought killing me was the easy way to get it. He was about to learn that nothing about Harold Mitchell had ever been easy. 3 days into my recovery at Marcus's cabin, the irony hit me like a sledgehammer. I was sitting by the window, my left arm in a proper sling Marcus had fashioned from an old shirt, watching him tend to his small vegetable garden. The simple peace of it reminded me of my childhood, before ambition consumed my life. That's when the memory surfaced, clear as mountain air and twice as sharp. It was 18 months ago. I'd been sitting in my lawyer's office, across from Thomas Brennan, the only man I trusted completely in a world full of vultures. The meeting that would save my life, though I didn't know it then. Harold, you're being paranoid, Thomas had said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the documents I'd requested. Maybe, I'd replied, staring out at the Seattle skyline. But 40 years in real estate teaches you that everyone has a price. Even family. The catalyst had been a conversation I'd overheard at my 60th birthday party. Danny, drunk on expensive champagne, talking to his friend Jake behind the pool house. 3 more years, maybe 5 at most? The old man can't live forever, and when he's gone, everything changes. No more waiting, no more proving myself. Just me and 200 million reasons to celebrate. The casual cruelty in his voice had chilled me more than any business rival ever had. But it also made me think. If Danny was already counting down the days until my death, what would happen if someone else got impatient? What if a business partner decided I was more valuable dead than alive? What if greed turned family against family? That night, I made a decision that would prove to be the difference between Danny getting away with murder and justice being served. Thomas, I'd said during that meeting, I want to create something unusual. A trust that's designed to protect my assets from everyone, including myself. Thomas had raised an eyebrow. Explain. All my shares in Mitchell Real Estate, all my properties, everything, I want them transferred to a hidden trust. But here's the twist. The trust can only release those assets under one specific condition. Which is? My death must be officially confirmed by you, personally, as both my lawyer and the trust's executor. Not a death certificate from some random doctor. Not a coroner's report. You have to examine my body and confirm my identity yourself. Thomas had leaned back in his leather chair. Harold, that's unconventional. It's also bulletproof. Think about it. If someone wants to kill me for my money, they have to involve you in the process. And you're too honest to be bought, which means you'll ask questions. Lots of questions. What if I die first? Then the trust has a backup executor, Judge Margaret Chin. She's known me for 20 years, and she's even more incorruptible than you are. It had taken 3 months to set up properly. 3 months of secret meetings, coded documents, and legal structures so complex that even I sometimes lost track of the details. But the core was simple. No Harold Mitchell body personally confirmed by Thomas Brennan meant no inheritance for anyone. I told myself it was just insurance, a safeguard against unlikely scenarios. I'd never expected to need it. Now, lying in Marcus's spare bed with broken ribs and a heart full of betrayal, I realized that my paranoia had been prophecy. "You're smiling," Marcus observed, bringing me a cup of coffee that tasted like heaven. "First time since I found you." "Good news?" "You could say that." I took a sip, savoring both the warmth and the revelation. "Marcus, can I ask you something? If someone you trusted completely betrayed you, what would you do?" He settled into the chair beside my bed, his weathered face thoughtful. "Depends. We talking about getting even or getting justice? What's the difference? Getting even is about making yourself feel better. Getting justice is about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." I nodded slowly. Through the cabin window, I could see storm clouds gathering over the mountains. What if you could do both? Then I'd say that person made a serious mistake messing with you. The next morning, Marcus helped me walk to his old radio, one of those emergency models that could pick up local news stations. I needed to know what story Danny was telling the world. The news hit me like a physical blow. Local real estate mogul Harold Mitchell, 63, is missing and presumed dead after a hiking accident in Eagles Peak National Park. His grandson Daniel Mitchell, who was hiking with him, became separated from his grandfather during their trek. Search and rescue teams found evidence of a fall, but no body has been recovered. Mitchell real estate empire stocks have been suspended from trading pending clarification of succession plans. Missing and presumed dead. Perfect. Danny was playing it exactly as I'd expected, the grieving grandson who lost track of his grandfather in the wilderness. No body meant no questions about how I'd fallen. No investigation meant no scrutiny of his story. But it also meant no death certificate. And without Thomas Brennan's personal confirmation of my death, the trust remained locked tighter than Fort Knox. I imagine Danny right now, probably sitting in my office chair, calling lawyers and demanding immediate access to my assets. I could picture his confusion, then his growing panic, as lawyer after lawyer told him the same thing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell, but without the proper death confirmation procedures, the estate remains frozen." "Marcus," I said, turning away from the radio, "how long would it take me to heal enough to travel?" "Depends where you're going and how badly you want to get there." I thought about Danny's cold eyes, about the sound of his footsteps walking away as I lay broken on that ledge. About 40 years of building something meaningful, only to have my own blood try to steal it through murder. "I want to get there badly enough to crawl if I have to." Marcus studied my face. "Then I'd say 2 weeks. Maybe 10 days if you're as stubborn as you look." "I'm twice as stubborn as I look." "In that case," he said with a grin, "better make it a week. Something tells me you've got an appointment to keep." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains like a promise of storms to come. Being dead had its advantages. 2 weeks after my accident, I sat in Marcus's pickup truck across from Mitchell Real Estate headquarters, watching my empire crumble through binoculars. My ribs still ached, and my left arm remained weak, but I was mobile enough to begin my haunting. The first shock was seeing Danny behind my desk through the 20th floor window. He'd moved fast, too fast. My personal belongings were already gone, replaced by his collection of expensive gadgets and meaningless awards. The sight of him lounging in my chair, feet up on the mahogany desk I'd bought with my first big commission, made my blood boil. But it was what happened next that truly opened my eyes. "There," Marcus said, adjusting the truck's side mirror. "Black sedan, been parked there for an hour." I focused the binoculars on the car. 2 men in expensive suits sat inside, occasionally glancing up at the building. I didn't recognize them, but something about their predatory patience made my skin crawl. Vultures, I muttered. You know them? No. But I know the type. Over the next 3 days, I watched those vultures multiply. Different cars, different faces, but the same hungry expressions. They were circling my wounded company like sharks sensing blood in the water. Danny had no idea he was being watched. Through careful surveillance and a few well-placed bribes to building maintenance staff, I learned the horrifying truth about my grieving grandson. He wasn't just incompetent, he was actively destroying everything I'd built. His first brilliant decision was firing Sarah Chin, my head of acquisitions. Sarah had been with the company for 8 years and had personally negotiated deals worth over $50 million. Her crime? Questioning Danny's judgment during a board meeting. She disrespected me in front of the whole room. I heard him complain to his friend Jake over drinks at the Ritz-Carlton bar, where I sat 3 tables away wearing a baseball cap and fake beard Marcus had helped me acquire. I don't care how good she supposedly is. Nobody talks to me like that. His second masterstroke was approving a development deal in Portland without proper soil testing. I'd rejected that same deal 6 months earlier after our geological survey revealed unstable ground conditions. Danny signed the contract anyway, putting $12 million of company money at risk. But it was the third revelation that truly sickened me. I was following him after another of his liquid lunches when he met with Viktor Kozlov outside Pioneer Square. Kozlov, a Russian businessman I tangled with years earlier over a waterfront property deal. He was dirty money wrapped in expensive suits, and I'd banned him from all Mitchell real estate transactions. Daniel, my friend, Kozlov said, embracing Danny like they were old partners. I trust the Portland situation is proceeding as planned? Everything's on track, Danny replied. Once the soil reports are adjusted, we can move forward with the full development. Adjusted, the word hit me like a physical blow. Danny wasn't just making bad decisions, he was actively committing fraud. And he was doing it with one of the most dangerous men in the Pacific Northwest. Excellent, Kozlov continued. My investors will be pleased. And your compensation? $5 million, like we discussed. Plus a 10% stake in the development profits. I nearly dropped the binoculars. Danny was selling out the company for personal gain, risking not just our reputation but our legal standing. The Portland deal would collapse eventually, probably taking half our legitimate business with it. But Kozlov's next words froze my blood entirely. It's unfortunate about your grandfather's accident, he said, his accent making the words sound like a threat. Such a stubborn old man. Always so. Difficult to work with. Danny's laugh was cold and calculating. Yeah, well, sometimes problems have a way of solving themselves. The implication hung in the air like poison. Had Kozlov known about Danny's plan to kill me? Had he encouraged it? Or was Danny just boasting about his successful murder to impress a criminal? Either way, I now understood that this betrayal went deeper than family greed. My grandson hadn't just tried to kill me for my money. He made deals with dangerous people who would use my company as a front for money laundering and worse. Over the following week, I uncovered more corruption than I'd imagined possible. 3 board members were taking kickbacks from contractors. Our head of finance was skimming money through fake consulting fees. Even my longtime secretary, Margaret, was selling inside information to competing real estate firms. My absence had exposed the rot that had been festering beneath the surface of my empire for years. People I trusted, fed, promoted, they'd all been waiting for me to disappear so they could feast on the carcass. The most heartbreaking discovery came on a Thursday afternoon. I was watching the building from a coffee shop when I saw Elizabeth Warren, my former business partner's daughter, whom I'd mentored like my own child, leaving the building with a briefcase full of documents. I followed her to a meeting with representatives from Coastal Development Group, our biggest competitor. Through the restaurant window, I watched her hand over what looked like client lists and development plans. She was selling my company's secrets for what appeared to be a generous check. That night, sitting in Marcus's cabin, I felt older than my 63 years. You look like a man who's seen too much, Marcus observed, pouring me a whiskey. I built something I was proud of, I said. Turns out I was just feeding a den of thieves. So what's your move? I stared into the amber liquid, thinking about Danny's cold laughter, about Kozlov's threats, about all the people who'd smiled to my face while sharpening knives for my back. I'm going to let them think they've won, I said finally. Let them get comfortable, greedy, careless. And then? Then I'm going to remind them why Harold Mitchell didn't stay dead the first 63 times life tried to kill him. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, death's messenger, preparing to deliver some very overdue justice. The day of reckoning arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. After 3 weeks of surveillance, I'd learned that Danny had finally convinced a judge to declare me legally dead. The final signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the Mitchell Building's main conference room, 23rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd helped build. Thomas Brennan had fought the declaration every step of the way, exactly as I'd hoped. But even he couldn't delay the inevitable forever when faced with Danny's tears, fake witness statements about my deteriorating mental state, and a team of expensive lawyers claiming I'd suffered a hiking accident. What Danny didn't know was that Thomas had called me 2 days earlier. Harold, Thomas had said when I answered Marcus's old landline. I hope to God this is really you and not some cruel joke. It's me, old friend. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. That bastard. He actually tried to kill you. He did more than try. But I'm harder to kill than he thought. The signing is Tuesday. I can delay it maybe one more day, but don't. Let it happen exactly as scheduled. Just make sure you're there with all the paperwork ready. Harold, what are you planning? I'd smiled at that, though he couldn't see it. Justice, Thomas? Pure, simple justice. Now, standing in the elevator of my own building, I adjusted my tie and checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. 3 weeks of healing had left me with a permanent limp and some impressive scars, but I was strong enough for what came next. Marcus had driven me to the building's underground garage, where my old security card still worked. Danny hadn't thought to deactivate it. Getting to the 23rd floor undetected required timing and a little help from Janet, the cleaning lady who'd worked late shifts for 10 years and still remembered which side her bread was buttered on. Mr. Mitchell, she'd whispered when I'd approached her cart near the service elevator. Everyone said you were. I mean, we heard. I got better, Janet. Think you can help me surprise some people? Her grin had been worth $1 million. The service corridor led directly behind the conference room. Through the maintenance access panel, I could hear voices, Danny's arrogant laughter, the nervous chatter of board members, the rustle of papers being shuffled. I checked my watch, 9:58 a.m. Thomas's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could take our seats. We're here today to execute the final transfer of Harold Mitchell's estate to his sole heir, Daniel Mitchell, following the court's declaration of death in absentia. Perfect timing. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked around the corner into the main corridor. The conference room doors were solid mahogany with frosted glass panels. I could see the blurred shapes of 12 people seated around the table. Danny's voice. Thomas, I know this is difficult for you. Grandpa always said you were more like family than his lawyer. But it's time to let go. He's gone, and the company needs leadership. Indeed it does, I said, and pushed open the doors. The reaction was instantaneous and beautiful. Sarah Chen's coffee cup hit the floor with a crash. Board member Robert Walsh made a sound like a deflating balloon. Margaret, my former secretary, went white as paper and actually grabbed her chest. But it was Danny's face that I'd remember forever. The color drained from his cheeks so fast I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and his hands began to shake so violently that the pen he'd been holding clattered onto the mahogany table. Hello, everyone, I said, walking slowly around the table to my chair, the one Danny had been occupying moments before. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder. The silence was so complete I could hear the building's ventilation system humming overhead. Danny finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. You're supposed to be dead? I settled into my chair, wincing slightly as my healing ribs protested. Yes, I heard about that. Funny thing about death, it's not always permanent. Thomas had recovered fastest, his lawyer's training kicking in. Harold, thank God. When you didn't return my calls, I thought. I needed some time to think, Thomas. Amazing how clear your perspective becomes when someone pushes you off a cliff. The words hit the room like a bomb. Several board members gasped. Margaret actually stood up as if to leave, but I held up a hand. Please, everyone stay seated. We have so much to discuss. Danny was staring at me like I was a ghost, which, in a way, I was. Grandpa, I don't understand. The accident. We got separated on the trail. I looked everywhere for you. Did you? I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. Tell me, Danny, how hard did you look? Before or after you pushed me off Eagle's Peak? His face went from white to green. I would never. That's insane. Why would you even think? Because I remember every second of it. Your hands on my chest. Your voice saying I'm sorry, Grandpa, the sound of your footsteps walking away while I lay bleeding on the rocks below. The boardroom erupted in shocked whispers, but I wasn't finished. 3 weeks, Danny? I spent 3 weeks watching you destroy everything I built. I've seen your meetings with Viktor Kozlov. I know about the Portland fraud. I know about the bribes, the kickbacks, the stolen client lists. I stood up slowly, my eyes never leaving his face. I know about everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Danny's mouth moved wordlessly, like a man drowning in his own lies. Around the table, board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their shoes. The guilty ones knew their time was up. The innocent ones were piecing together the magnitude of what they'd just witnessed. Security. I said calmly into the intercom. Please escort Mr. Daniel Mitchell from the building. And call Detective Morrison at Seattle PD. Tell him Harold Mitchell has some very interesting evidence about an attempted murder. You can't prove anything. Danny finally managed, though his voice cracked like a teenager's. It's your word against mine. You're an old man who survived a hiking accident and now you're having delusions. Actually, Thomas interrupted, pulling out a thick manila folder. We can prove quite a lot. I smiled at my old friend. Always 2 steps ahead, just like I'd taught him. You see, Danny, I continued, while you were busy celebrating my death and destroying my company, I was documenting everything. Every meeting with Kozlov. Every fraudulent signature. Every bribe you authorized. I nodded to Thomas, who began distributing photographs from the folder. Danny's face in clear focus, shaking hands with Kozlov. Danny signing the fraudulent Portland contracts. Danny laughing as he told his friend about problems, solving themselves. We also have audio recordings, I added, watching his face go from green to gray. Amazing what people will say when they think no one's listening. Margaret stood up abruptly. Harold, I can explain about the consulting contracts. Sit down, Margaret. My voice carried the authority of 40 years of command. You'll get your turn to explain to the police. She collapsed back into her chair like a punctured balloon. Detective Morrison arrived within 20 minutes, along with 2 uniformed officers. I'd worked with Morrison on a fraud case 3 years earlier. He was thorough, honest, and had zero tolerance for corporate corruption. Mr. Mitchell, he said, shaking my hand. When I got the call that you were alive, I thought someone was playing a joke. Glad to see the reports of your death were greatly exaggerated. So am I, Detective. So am I. The arrests were swift and efficient. Danny first, charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. His protestations echoed through the hallway as they led him away in handcuffs. This is insane. He's crazy. You can't believe a senile old man. Margaret followed, along with Robert Walsh and 2 other board members who'd been skimming money. Elizabeth Warren would be arrested at her home later that afternoon, along with the coastal development executives who'd been buying our secrets. As for Viktor Kozlov, well, Detective Morrison assured me that the FBI had been building a case against him for months. My evidence would be the final nail in his very expensive coffin. By noon, the conference room was empty except for Thomas and me. "Hell of a morning," Thomas said, loosening his tie. "Hell of a 3 weeks," I replied, staring out at the city skyline. Seattle looked different now, smaller somehow, less imposing. "Thomas, I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "I want to sell the company." He nearly choked on his coffee. "Harold, you just got it back. After everything you've been through. That's exactly why I need to sell it." I turned away from the window to face him. "Look what it cost me, Thomas. My own grandson tried to murder me for this empire. My trusted employees robbed me blind. My business partners betrayed me without hesitation." I walked to my desk. Danny's expensive gadgets had already been cleared away by security, and picked up a framed photo of my late wife, Helen. She'd died 5 years ago, and I'd thrown myself into work to avoid the grief. Maybe that had been the beginning of the end. "When Helen was dying," I continued, "she begged me to spend more time with family. Said the business would survive without me, but people wouldn't. I ignored her. Kept working, kept building, kept accumulating wealth and power." I set the photo down gently. "I created a monster, Thomas. Not just Annie, the whole culture of greed that surrounded this place. People saw what I had and decided they deserved a piece, no matter what it cost. So what will you do?" I'd been thinking about that question for 3 weeks. "There's a young couple in Portland, Maria and James Santos. They run a small construction company, trying to build affordable housing for working families. Remind me of Helen and me when we were starting out." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You want to give them the company?" "I want to sell it to them for $1. Let them build something better than what I created. Something focused on helping people instead of just making money. And the money from the other assets? Charitable foundation. Education, housing assistance, programs for at-risk youth. Maybe if we help enough kids like Danny grow up with perspective, fewer of them will turn into murderers." Thomas nodded slowly. "Helen would be proud." "I hope so." 6 months later, I was sitting on Marcus's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The Santos family had transformed Mitchell Real Estate into something beautiful, a company that built homes instead of just investments, that treated employees like family instead of assets to be exploited. Danny was serving 15 years for attempted murder. The other conspirators had received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. Viktor Kozlov was fighting extradition to 3 different countries. As for me, I'd discovered that being dead had taught me how to live. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, handing me a beer. I thought about that question for a long moment. "Just one." "Which is?" "I should have listened to Helen sooner. Should have learned the difference between building an empire and building a legacy." The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called through the darkness. But this time, it didn't sound like death's messenger. It sounded like peace.